Great. Well, it's great to see everybody. Welcome to our Sustainable Cities Network and Climate and Resilience Workgroup meeting for January. We're very excited to discuss focusing on co-benefits to advance climate action with Danae Presler, who is Sustainability Officer with the City of Avondale. As we know, Avondale is one of the growing communities in the western section of the Metro Phoenix area, and they face a lot of very interesting challenges, but a lot of unique opportunities. And today, Danae is going to be talking about building community resilience through a variety of different types of efforts dealing with extreme heat, advancing equity, and mitigating climate change, also by focusing on the co-benefits of various things like trees, low impact development, electric vehicles, and local food systems and more. And as we know, some of those actions really have so many benefits that we need to figure out how to leverage those co-benefits. So I think this is going to be a very helpful and interesting presentation today, particularly as she talks about how they've maybe taken some innovative approaches, that focus on maybe recreation and healthy communities in order to have those drivers to be a sustainable city. And so a little bit about Danae, and she has been kind of one of our movers and shakers, I think, in the Valley for several years. And prior to coming to the City of Avondale, she worked with the City of Chandler as the Neighborhood Programs Administrator. And so that's how I kind of got to know Danae, was a little bit before actually she started with them. She hails from the Northwest, right? No, kind of upper Midwest, so Minnesota. And so she holds a Master's of Environmental Studies from the Evergreen State College and a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Minnesota State University, Mankato. And so very, very well qualified. And as the Sustainability Officer for the City of Avondale, she leads efforts on all things sustainability. So electric vehicle adoption, energy management, heat mitigation, and other initiatives. And yeah, she wears many, many hats throughout the city. And so we are very excited to welcome Danae. So Danae, I will hand it over to you if you want to pull up your slides.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. I'm so pleased to see many familiar, friendly faces, as well as many new attendees that I have not had a chance to meet yet. I hope everybody gets to take something away from this, but I want to acknowledge that there are a lot of mentors of mine in the room, and so I really appreciate all the learning opportunities that you have all afforded me. So thank you very much, and I'll go ahead and get this presentation pulled up. Okay, so today we're going to be focusing on co-benefits in order to advance climate action. And I'm going to be highlighting some of the efforts and strategies that the City of Avondale has been leveraging. So a little bit about what we're going to cover today. I want to provide some Avondale context for those that are not already familiar with the city, and a quick rundown of some of the climate and resilience challenges that we're facing locally. And several examples of how we're taking action across enabling the adoption of electric vehicles, promoting more active transportation, walking and biking, some interesting LID infrastructure projects, planting more trees, as well as starting to dabble into vertical farming. And I'll discuss how we've been leveraging these co-benefits and advancing equity. So this is a map with Avondale highlighted in kind of this brown, and we are located in the West Valley of the Phoenix Metro. Right now, Avondale is home to about 89,000 people. We have 3 rivers, which makes us unique in a desert environment, and 2 of those have water in them year round. So really blessed to have a river community here in the desert, as well as the Estrella Mountain Range, so really beautiful area. The city itself is about 45 square miles. Approximately the northern half of that portion has been developed. Everything that's south of the Estrella Mountains is still native desert. So there's no current development there, but the city is looking at what future development might look like. We have a really young population. Avondale has 60% of people under the age of 40, a lot of young families. And we're really diverse, with 56% of the community being Hispanic, 10% Black or African American, as well as a sizable population for Asian, Native Americans, and white non-Hispanics. So I want to touch on some of the climate and resilience challenges that we're seeing in our community and across our region. Of course, heat being the one that is at our forefront often, especially as we start to move towards summer. This is a graph that I steal often from our friends at the National Marine. Oh gosh, help me with it. Ian, what's the organization that puts this chart together for us?
Oh, for Maricopa County, so the NOAA group?
Yes, but I want to drop the contact info for that heat resilience group, because I think that's really been beneficial.
Oh, the Arizona Heat Resilience Working Group.
Yes, I want to make sure we plug that, because this is a group that focuses on these issues year round. So the graph here is showing everything that's happened to date is in these pink bars. The pink bars are the averages of the number of days that were over 110 in Phoenix. The dots are individual years, so that you can kind of see the standout year here in 2020, where we had that record setting 53 days of temperature over 110. And the gray and black bars that are everything between now and the next 50 years are projections. And the difference between the black bar and that gray bar is our efforts to reduce emissions. And so just want to kind of call attention that we are looking for 2020 to be potentially the new normal by the mid-century. But there's opportunities to drastically reduce that impact of extreme heat. And we know that extreme heat is a very big public health concern. And in 2020 alone, Maricopa County lost 323 people to heat-related illnesses. So it's a serious issue, and we have an opportunity to improve there. This is a heat vulnerability map that was put together by ASU and several other universities. It's showing Avondale and in general the Phoenix Metro. The important thing here is that the lighter colors are less heat vulnerable, whereas those darker reds, which we see in Avondale more in our Old Town region, as well as parts of Cache and Las Ligas neighborhoods. And there was layered on top of this, I put in a really interesting study that Dr. Piafka at ASU did with his team that was looking at daytime surface temps between the community here that's called Crystal Gardens and the community right next door called Crystal Point. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what makes Crystal Gardens really unique, but here you can see that there's a considerable difference in the surface temperatures. Granted, this is not the same as like that thermal comfort or what we feel when we're walking in the neighborhood, but it is a good indicator of the difference in heat. And we can see that also represented through the heat vulnerability. So some unique opportunities to localize cooling that I'll be touching on here shortly. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention water. We are in a tier 1 shortage for Colorado River water. And I've mentioned or noted a couple of the reductions. This is primarily affecting our Arizona farmers that are in central Arizona. And so also looking at what Avondale can do to have a more sustainable local food system that's not so water dependent. And then on the climate mitigation side, when we're looking at our community-wide greenhouse gas emissions, we're seeing that 83% of that is coming from electricity and transportation. So that's where we want to focus a lot of our efforts. In our community, transportation is the #1 source of emissions, so that we've been putting particular focus in that region. So I'm going to show you some examples now of climate actions that the City of Avondale has taken. The first one here is highlighting our electric vehicle charging stations. You can see Mayor Ken Weiss out here. He debuted this station when it opened. But more importantly than just putting in our, our own charging stations, the city was the first in the state to mandate a standard for new developments to actually install electric vehicle charging stations. We noticed that the city has this kind of desert for charging stations. And in order to help meet our needs for electric vehicle adoption, we are actually integrating that EV installation as well as something called EV capable into those standards to prepare better for the future. This is a really beautiful image of Central Avenue. This is a main road that runs through our Old Town area, and it was a road diet, which is a kind of a fun way to think about basically shrinking down your road space and giving more space to bicyclists and pedestrians. And you can see here, there's a separated bike path. This is really important. Our streets, anybody in Arizona knows that our speed limits are really fast throughout most of the Phoenix metro. And so helping protect bicyclists is really important to making it more accessible for people. This area in particular was picked because there are a lot of students that go to and from school. And if you live within a close area to the school, there's no bus service. And so a lot of these students are biking or walking, and it was there was additional safety factors that led to the creation of this road diet. And now, because of that benefit, we see many others that are not attending school still taking advantage of this great network of bicycle and pedestrian friendly pathways. This is a beautiful image of that Crystal Gardens neighborhood. And so you'll remember on that map, this is the one that I was showing was a lot cooler than the neighborhood even just right next to it. And this is an example of low impact development that's one of my favorite in the city. And it was very forward thinking, where the city took an opportunity to use basically environmental processes to treat water before it's recharged. And instead of sending it to a treatment facility, we are leveraging those ecological systems. The city actually grows its own tilapia and feeds these kind of man-made wetland systems. There's 18 different lakes in this neighborhood that naturally filtrate the water before it's sent to recharge. And the important thing is that it's in the neighborhood. And so you get a lot of local cooling benefits as a result of having this water in a community as opposed to sometimes on the outskirts. Okay, and then trees. Everybody that I talk to in the city has been very big fans of planting more trees. We know that there's not only the direct benefit from the shade that they provide, but through basically trees sweating or evapotranspiration, they also act as little air conditioning units right in that localized area. So trees are a really great natural way to cool down our cities. And they also have that added benefit of mitigating climate change by grabbing extra carbon out of the air. So a couple of fun pictures of, we've been partnering with utility companies and nonprofits to get more trees planted where they're most needed. And then this is my last example I want to highlight. And this may be kind of a new concept for many people. It's new age farming. There's a company that's coming into Avondale called 1.1, and they are a kind of like, I think of them as farming meets robotics meets urban cities. And so they are vertical farming, meaning that they grow their crops up, which has a much smaller land footprint. And they, through aeroponics system, they use significantly less water than they would if we were irrigating that same amount of cropland. All right, so I said we were going to kind of focus on these strategies. So we've seen that there's some really unique things that Avondale is doing. This is a graphic that was created from a community summit. The city recently did a 5-year strategic plan. And as part of that, they invited I don't want to say cartoonist because this is more than a cartoon, but they had somebody that was creating this visual as representatives from the community were saying what was important to them. And so this is kind of a neat graphic that shows what some of that feedback was. And what I wanted to point out in here is there are 0 mentions of climate change or climate action, but there's a lot of interest in water and greenery and recycling and diversity. And so there's a lot of sustainability concepts and climate action concepts embedded in this without needing to talk about climate change directly. So that's what we're going to shift our focus to now, is looking at these co-benefits. So when I'm talking about co-benefits, I'm primarily referring to those kind of added benefits that we get when we act on climate change and its impacts. And these are the benefits that go above and beyond what we would get just from a more stable climate. So looking at those examples we just talked about, we typically from a climate action standpoint would say, all right, we need to reduce our emissions, we need to sequester carbon, we need to increase resilience to extreme heat, increase our food security, decrease our water demand. And then we would point to these strategies as some tools to do that. Certainly there are many more. On the, actually, let me go to this next one. But with each of these, we have these co-benefits. So I'm just highlighting, some examples. With electric vehicles, this is an innovative technology. And so it's a way to show that your city is really innovative and is adopting technology that will kind of be the future of transportation. Another big issue for us is our air quality. Phoenix region has the 5th worst air quality in the nation, and it's important to do something about that. And that's been an area where we really recognize if we can reduce our tailpipe emissions coming out of vehicles, we can improve local air quality. So that's a co-benefit from that. Just increasing walkability and bikeability, that's great for safety as well as in promoting healthy lifestyles. And then from urban forestry, we see cleaner air again, which is really important for improving human health. And then we talked about the benefits of shade and cooling. Those wetlands, not only do they help build resilience to extreme heat, but they happen to be a great way to reduce treatment costs. In our case, that water is coming right out of the canal, and treating it locally through ecological processes means that we don't need to send it to a treatment facility and utilize chemical processes and then send it back to our recharge. We're kind of shortcutting that system and using natural processes, which has been a big benefit to our cost reduction too. And then with vertical farming, there's again that really futuristic and innovative side of it. We are promoting sustainable agriculture. Avondale has agricultural roots, so it's kind of that past meets the future concept. And then the big one here was economic development. That was the key driver in bringing in 1.1 to the city. And before I jump into equity, so the key point here is that when we're looking at climate action in Avondale, we're typically not looking at this left-hand side as a community. We're talking about the co-benefits, and that's how we've been able to get to climate action. So, all right, now this, I also want to mention advancing equity, and for many of you, this is not a new concept, but for anybody that's maybe starting to dabble in it, I think it's important that we just kind of, I'm going to put out my kind of feeling on it, and then we can certainly have more discussion about this. But we have seen that climate change is having a disproportionate effect on low-income communities and communities of color. Typically, these are the same communities that are contributing the least to climate change. Some examples of those effects would be heat vulnerability. As I was showing that map, Old Town is our most heat vulnerable area. That's also our area of low income, and is also where a higher proportion of people are Hispanic, and there's additional language barriers too. So we know that climate change is having a disproportionate impact in our community. We also see this with energy burden. So going off of heat, when the heat goes up, we are using our AC more, and that is increasing our electricity bills. If you are low income, you are paying a higher percent of your income towards energy. The other one I want to mention is access to transportation and healthcare, education, and jobs as being disproportionate if you are financially disadvantaged. And then a quick note here that climate change and equity, these issues are inextricably linked, and they can be mutually supportive. So I'm a visual learner. I kind of, there are, no visual is going to be perfect, but when we're talking about equity, I find that these kind of graphics can be helpful. So inequality here on the top left. Okay, so when we're looking at that tree, think of these apples as opportunities. And so it's showing here that there's, with inequality, you see an unequal access to those opportunities. Equality used to be kind of the buzzword, and now it's gotten a lot of flack because it doesn't seem to be doing enough. But basically, it means that you're giving the same tools and assistance to everybody. But the problem is you're still not providing equal access to those opportunities by giving everybody the same thing. So when we look at equity, this is adjusting those resources or those tools so that they're providing a more equal opportunity or access to those opportunities. And then justice goes a step further. This is actually fixing those systems that are creating that unequal access. So this is another, like if you're not really into the tree one, this is a baseball one that that's often floated around. And here you're seeing equality. Everybody's getting the same thing. Everybody gets a box. However, some still cannot see this baseball game because that box doesn't get them over that barrier. In equity, you're redistributing those tools and resources so that everybody has an opportunity to access whatever the resource may be. And then justice, you're removing that barrier. So that fence is gone. The baseball game, kind of a risky example of this because nobody wants to, actually see no fences around the baseball game could be dangerous. But the idea is taking away that barrier. And there's many different types of equity, and I'm not going to read through all of these, but the Urban Sustainability Directors Network has broken this down in, I think, some useful ways. So there's procedural, distributional, structural, and intergenerational equity. When I think about these, I kind of drill it down into here's some initial steps that our cities can be taking. Number one is just making sure that we're identifying and we're protecting those who are most vulnerable to these adverse effects of climate change, and that we're working towards a more inclusive and transparent decision-making process, thinking about who's at the table, and importantly, who's not been invited to be at the table, and then ensuring that youth voices are welcomed and empowered and are listened to. Okay, and I had no idea where to put this slide in, but Jenny had kind of given me some pointers, and it can be helpful to think about kind of the organizational structure of sustainability in the city. For the City of Avondale, sustainability is a division that's within our Development and Engineering Services Department. Right now, it's just one full-time employee, that's me, but what I think is so important that the city has been able to take a lot of sustainability efforts, and it's not because of this just one position. It's because there is this culture of sustainability across our organization. So there are many sustainability advocates that work in just about every department in the organization that I've already connected with, and probably more that I have yet to meet. The position itself for the sustainability officer evolved from the environmental program manager, and I do still oversee our stormwater and some of our air quality permits. And another kind of unique feature is that the sustainability division is funded through a $1 environmental fee that's on everybody's monthly water bill. So wrapping this up in a nutshell, what I'm hoping are some of the key messages that come across is that by focusing on these co-benefits can really provide this common ground for us to move forward on climate action without necessarily having to call attention to that. Making the connection between equity and climate change and knowing that we can address these and need to be addressing these issues together. And that number 3, that culture of sustainability is just as important as having dedicated staff working towards sustainability. And that's my presentation. I'm going to stop it here so that we can have some conversation.
Thank you, Danae. We actually had a couple of questions in the chat. So maybe we can start there first. And so Mark Roseland, who is one of our esteemed faculty that's involved with climate and resilience, said one of the challenges of achieving co-benefits is breaking down silos to show how these dots are connected. Do you have any tools to help people understand and or visualize the connections?
Yes, that's a great question, Mark. And I'm sure you've got some ideas of tools too. And so I hope you'll share those with us. In Avondale, there's a lot of interdepartmental, so we work across departments for a lot of different projects. And I would say, for instance, Jennifer and her predecessor had helped the city put together some work on water that was cutting across departments. And so that starts to build relationships that I'm still leveraging today for our, what we have an internal sustainability task force, and they are representatives from each city department that are serving to help advance our climate action, or actually in our case, it's our community sustainability goals. But I do refer a lot to like the heat vulnerability map. I have another one that I use that's kind of a health dashboard that show some of the data that can translate to different fields of study very easily. But those are a couple of things. Do you have others, Mark, that you like?
Hi, Danae. Yeah, I'm working on developing dashboard tools that do exactly those kinds of things, like to make those connections between equity and housing and health and heat. So I'll be happy to follow up with you later and tell you about them.
Wonderful, thank you.
That's really exciting. I just want to say, as a city who we need more data, right? We need to be making these connections.
Yeah, Ryan, I see your question here. Do you want to just maybe restate this to the group and we'll make it a conversation?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. My background is in urban planning, and I think a lot about the interrelationship between transportation choices and our development patterns of our land uses, and how the difference of, how a lot of the communities outside of Phoenix, as Phoenix grows, continues to be sort of siloed or monolithic in its development patterns of all housing here, all commercial centers here at the interchange of this interstate, grabbing up a lot of the retail demands that might be all isolated in these 50,000 square foot boxes. And, so what it's done is it's fragmented what used to be complete compact connected communities historically have, through the influence of automobile dominance and zoning regulation. In any case, so there's the push to pull these development patterns back together like they historically were, for the sake of proximity and walkability and bikeability, so that we can reduce our car dependence. And so when you talk about this introduction of wetlands into a development pattern where we're trying to promote that proximity of pulling together the compact communities again, is there this trade-off, or is there a sort of a framework or an evaluation tool that Avondale kind of uses in order to sort of weigh those pros and cons in the trade-off?
Yeah, Ryan, good question. I'm gonna do my best to answer. If I miss anything, let me know. But I think you're really onto something that I think is a big piece of this, is like, if we could just be more strategic about how these communities develop so that people could easily access them on, on foot or by bike or other kind of active transportation. We could really not only benefit climate change, but I think there's a lot of community connection benefits that come from that too. One of the, I guess, opportunities I think cities have is when it comes time to redo general plan and zoning maps. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to kind of get some of that more mixed use development integrated. I know that in Avondale, that zoning map is really important because that says what developers more or less can or can't do in an area. And we know that can change over time, and developers can rezone if they have a project in mind. But that map is really a crucial part of the planning process. And so in Avondale, we're talking about how we're going to update our general plan. So that's kind of what we're starting to think about. There's some support for more mixed use development, but I wouldn't say that we have it, a tool figured out or even like a checklist yet.
Yeah, and I know this also factors into State Route 30 that the city has advocated for through the regional transportation plans. So all of this comes together in Avondale in a unique way, given the proximity to having wet rivers and everything in our climate. So it's just interesting, specifically for the fact that you do have two wet rivers that run through your community, as this seems to be higher than most cities, something to grapple with. Good luck with you, to you. And by the way, we're linked in with Eric on your general plan update as well at my office. So we're hoping to integrate all the health systems and health impact analyses through that process.
Yeah,
so we should connect.
If I can just add too, it just feels like this is the Central Avenue, right? Is actually that incrementalism, right? Is that incremental development of like, we've got this general plan and we've got these developments that are going this way. And I think they're kind of what Ryan's speaking to is reconnecting our neighborhoods and compact development. Like that road is so cool, right? And I think that, whenever I talk to anybody about transportation and land use, I'm like, well, did your parents walk to school or not, right? And I think that like our health statistics have correlated with that, right? Of how we've developed and how things have changed in our community. And so I just want to say like, bravo, first of all, for that road diet, because I know it's really hard to get done. We've been having some difficult conversations in our community about that sort of stuff, right? Of who are we prioritizing? But the fact that you've got kids walking to school and biking to school is a really good sign, right? And you're planning around them and you're supporting that already existing activity. So kudos to y'all.
I also think, and this is not just unique to Avondale, but a lot of the redevelopment is really great opportunities where we're seeing some really interesting kind of bringing in business into the local community. And when you do that, now you're creating jobs locally where ideally people can just walk now to work, or if that business can serve the community, whether that's through food or entertainment. So I think as far as the new development, I really look to like those zoning maps as being a big opportunity. But the other piece of it is redeveloping our existing neighborhoods and communities. And supporting things like businesses in neighborhoods can leverage it, but it can be really challenging too.
Danae, Viosa has a question in the chat. Thank you, Ryan. I just want to make sure we get to Viosa's question as well, which is somewhat related to what Ryan was talking about, but it's more from the side of affordable housing and homelessness. I know there's been a lot of publicity just within the last couple of days with regards to how affordable housing we may be at this kind of interesting juncture in Arizona and the Phoenix metro region as far as having affordable housing. And so, yeah, can you speak to that? And then also the implications with homelessness, because those numbers are going up too.
Yeah, and these are, big, challenging issues as well as opportunities for cities across our region and really across the world. But in Avondale, affordable housing has been something that our council has been really advocating for, looking at more solutions. So there's a couple of, one of the gaps that we identified is even for people that get into Section 8 or having voucher for housing, it can take several months for them to actually move into that home. And so the city is right now constructing what would be considered transitional housing. So it's people that are moving into public housing, but would be otherwise without shelter. And so this is helping to kind of identify or helping to fill that gap in a small way. And then the idea is that they'll be reused time and time again as people move into more stable housing conditions. We do also have some interest in having communities that are more of a mixed income. So instead of just having these big giant houses, we'd like to see kind of a mix of housing prices, I want to say, and that usually is different housing sizes too. But I wouldn't say that we've by any means solved it, but it is something that the council is looking at and is really an urgent issue. We are also in talks with partners on how do we provide more affordable housing in the city. So there's some regional partners that we're looking at that with. And the same is really true with homelessness. There has been more concern and more interest in finding more sustainable solutions to that. But I would have to bring in some of our neighborhood and family services team to say more, because they really are our experts in leading that effort.
I was going to say, Danae, don't you have a new resource center in Avondale specifically that's kind of helping with some of those public assistance opportunities?
Yeah, and they've also hired on more navigators. And for those that maybe haven't heard of navigators, this is if there's a call for somebody that is experiencing houselessness, they can, instead of going straight to having a police officer go out to the scene, which can be really confronting, the navigators are trained professionals that help offer resources and try to meet those needs of the individuals in order to have a more stable housing and living situation, instead of kind of confronting it with force. So there's been some really great strategies that way too. So Ryan, I'm reading your post here too about the electric vehicles and opportunities between fleet vehicles to respond to power failures by being deployed as a battery backup strategy. Yeah, and there's been some really interesting, electric vehicles open up a lot of new doors. There's a big push for looking at how there could be vehicle to grid integration, meaning our electric vehicles could essentially become these big portable energy storage packages. And in times of need, they could generate electricity in similar ways as a generator would. And I think I was just watching the football game and saw somebody plugging in their F-150 Lightning into their house in a power outage. I haven't seen fleets that are leveraging that yet, because I think the vehicle to grid technology is still evolving really quickly. But I think that's a really cool opportunity to look at how could this boost resilience, it's particularly with electricity outages. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
Just to add to that, given your slide of the increased number of 100+ degree days that we're seeing modeled, and the real life-saving technology, or the life-saving capability of having power to cool your home, as one of those points that just emphasize the need for resilience and power.
Yeah, and it also highlights the equity issues too, because right now we're seeing that electric vehicles, the adoption is not equitably distributed. It's largely wealthier, more affluent people that are able to purchase these electric vehicles. So there's a, you know, a big nut to crack there too. And that's on one side there, or on a note on how to increase equity for electric vehicles. It's even thinking about where are those charging stations. So if you live in an apartment complex, you likely currently don't have access to an outlet or a charging station that could be reliably used to refuel your vehicle. So how do we make sure that people in multifamily dwellings can have an electric vehicle as well? And certainly also with older homes, you know, as we look to, you know, changing standards for new development, what does that mean for current developments?
Well, and Danae, isn't Avondale looking at an EV roadmap right now so that you can do some of that policy implementation to make homes and new homes and existing facilities EV ready?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we do have standards right now for electric for new development, and primarily our focus for existing developments has been looking at, well, where can we put charging stations on city property that will increase access and access to charging for communities that are already existing, or especially low-income communities where sometimes resources from these where sometimes historically those resources haven't been put. So that's one strategy. It's, you know, where can the city make an impact without asking, you know, others to do that too.
You know, I think that's a great point for the equity aspect of it, because I mean, if you look at the distribution of the number of people under different kind of income categories, the larger share of the population is not at the high end. And so if we want to make progress, we have to address that. And the long-term costs of electric, I believe, are lower than a fossil fuel burning engine, but you have to pay the upfront costs in order to realize those back-end savings. And so the current structure of financing and access to capital, there are additional layers of historic inequities that are preventing that as well. So I think there's quite a layer cake kind of that needs to be dug through there. But this was a great presentation. I really appreciate everything you said.
Yeah, and for those that are really interested in the electric vehicle side, there's also a working group that Karen Apple, who I believe is still on the line with us. Karen Apple and I lead that group, so we get into kind of these discussions more often in there too. So we invite you to that.
There's a question in here from Paul Rosenboom with regards to, are you working closely with APS for the electrical grid supply for electric vehicles or any solar chargers?
So APS, our utility service provider, so actually Avondale is split pretty much 50-50 between APS and SRP. So we work with both partners to advance our EV infrastructure. With APS, we've taken advantage of, they have had a pilot study where they are putting in charging stations more or less for free for cities to help enable this adoption. And so we've taken advantage of that program twice now. We have not done any solar chargers specifically, but I think the city of Peoria may have gotten the EV arc or the solar arc. Gosh, it's really cool. It's like a portable one. So there's some neat kind of technology out there. We do have like our charging stations that we put in by City Hall. They're close to where we have our solar panel arrays. So we are taking advantage of those renewable electrons as best we can. The cost was a lot more expensive to put them right under the panel, but they're really close by.
I do want to recognize Matthew Potzler with City of Phoenix put a link in the chat for you today. It was a little bit farther up on the C40 cities regarding qualitative tools that assist municipalities to start, know where to start to where adaptation and mitigation actions overlap and the co-benefits for those actions.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. So I pulled that up. I'm going to flag and bookmark that too. Matt, have you been using that with City of Phoenix?
Hi, everyone. Hi, Danae. Thank you for that presentation. We started to use that, and then C40 Cities is actually working on quantitative models. And so they have like one for air quality, and they're updating that. So when we did our climate action plan, we used their pathways model to predict our greenhouse gas reductions. And so they're adding different modules to that that will help you assist in like co-benefits through like things like air quality reductions or improvements rather. So we did start using that co-benefits to see what, again, where to start to look for these different actions and where they kind of collide and overlap. So yeah, but again, it's a qualitative tool, but it's good to see, you know, what could come together and what you could talk to policymakers about.
And is the C40 tool, this new one, is this a free tool for communities to use?
Oh yeah. So you go to that link, there's a description of what it is, and then there's a YouTube video describing how it works. And then there's a link to download the Excel. So it's just an Excel file that's available to everyone.
Very cool. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
That's not the only tool they have for C40. So if you, depending what you're interested in, like retrofits or different tools for that, some are more quantitative than others. And what I've learned by working with C40, a lot of it has to do with your particular municipality's quality. So depending who you are and what kind of building you have or what kind of travel you have going on in your city will affect the outcomes of those models. So there's some front end work to do if you actually want quantitative results.
Yeah, and I was going to make a quick plug. A lot of cities have been really heavy on using quantitative data and kind of using that to drive some of our approaches. And one thing that I think is worth considering is that data is not always telling the full story. And so it's still really important to do these qualitative measures, if you want to call it that, but really it just means talking with the community and making sure that the data actually matches up with what's happening on the ground. A lot of times when we are breaking down that data into a census tract, it can be really skewed in weird ways, and you don't know it until you're actually at the granular level and just talking with your community to understand what those needs really are. So just a note there, I think the data can be really helpful to kind of get some initial ideas, but it's so important for us to be open to hearing feedback from the residents that are living and experiencing things directly, because that speaks volumes.
I was going to say we're getting close to the hour, I think. So Danae, do you have any parting thoughts? And does anybody have any last questions for Danae? And Jenny, I apologize. I don't know if you had a question up above. I saw your entry. So
did I start? Oh no, I was really thinking about equity and just the conversation. So thanks everybody. I did want to just ask, because it seems like so important and we have really struggled with this. You mentioned the name of your team that is across the organization and working on sustainability that makes you all be able to get so much done, right, with one staff person. Can you talk a little bit about the origin of that team? Is management on it or leadership, and how effective is it? I know we could have a whole hour on it, so maybe just any parting words on that.
Yeah, it was so our sustainability advisory task force, which is kind of our internal team that works across different departments, is primarily composed of directors and assistant directors. So it is higher level involvement. However, a lot of that work really gets done like with staff that are frontline, and so the direction can come from leadership, but then actually the implementation, I work really closely with our frontline staff to bring these ideas to life. The origin of it was the city had a municipal sustainability plan that kicked off in 2012. And as part of that, there was a green team that was brought together to look at each kind of department's contribution to creating a more sustainable municipal operation. And so there was kind of this history of a green team already. And so I've just kind of restarted that, but with a new focus on now we're looking at community wide as opposed to only our municipal operations.
Cool. That's a really cool mix, right? Of having the directors at the table, maybe to say, yes, we're bought in, and then working with the frontline staff to make it happen.
And I will just say my parting word is if you want to continue these discussions or tell me kind of what you're doing in your city, I'm going to put my contact info in the chat. Feel free to reach out.
Yes, and I will definitely put the recording in our Sustainable Cities Network meetings page so people can refer back to your slides as well as your contact information too, so that folks can get a hold of you directly. And yeah, I just want to thank you for sharing your information with everybody. A round of virtual applause for you. Thank you so much. So wonderful. And I feel like this is the beginning of us talking about co-benefits, because I think you've had great success in not necessarily just pitching it as a climate action, but really kind of tying it to, accessibility, transportation, health, livability, and so forth. And I really think that's how you speak to your residents and your decision makers. So it's a really important part of the pitch, I guess you could say, to get policies changed. So thank you very much, Danae.